Buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias
Good
por
morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this new Ask Me Anything webinar, this cycle. Today we'll be talking about design and design ops. The dynamics will be as usual. First, we will introduce the speakers, and then we will have the typical Q&A session. You may ask your questions by just turning on your microphone and camera, so don't be shy, and please feel free to ask whatever you want to ask. So without further ado, I'm leaving you with the speakers. Guys, go ahead. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know where you're joining us from. My name is Damián. I work mainly in sketching on GeneXus. So whatever you want to ask me about that, I'd be glad to answer that. Okay, I can introduce the others. So Mauro, I don't know if you'd like to introduce yourself. Yes, I'm Mauro. I lead the design team in GeneXus, and also I'm at your service. Hello, everyone. My name is Federico Salomón. I am also working in UI and UX modeling. So welcome and thank you for being here. Okay, so those were the introductions. And well, so I don't know if you want to make any comments before, but the Q&A session is already open. Okay, so our plan for today was to mainly focus this Q&A session on sketch design, how to export that to GeneXus. If you may have any doubts about the new object, so whatever question that you can have related to this, feel free to ask them, and we are here to just have that chat with you. Okay, so as I said, the session, the Q&A session is open, so feel free. Aníbal, yeah, maybe we could talk a bit about the video. Yeah, I think that's great. We have several videos, so I can share that with the attendees. We had the last GeneXus event, the GeneXus live event, which was about a month ago, and we have a number of videos on design in our deep dives. I haven't got the list, but with Damián, we gave a talk about DesignOps and how to import in GeneXus these sketch files. We also have one that is about Unánimo, which is the new GeneXus design system. Cecilia Fernandez gave a presentation about design systems. I gave a presentation myself about design systems as well. And maybe I'm missing something. Yeah, and we have one that was by Javier, that keynote, yeah, exactly, about design. And that was by Javier Verdura, who is a product leader at Tesla, which is a super interesting talk. And then there were also there was a follow-up session with the Q&A sessions as well. That was quite cool. So we had a lot of content on design in our event, and I'd like you to take a look at that. Aníbal has already shared on the chat the links to the videos, so feel free. Okay, so to break the ice, I've got some questions that I've got from before. I have a question by Gerardo. He says, I have a frame object. What is the best way to start using TSO? Okay, great. I'm going to answer that question to Gerardo. As you may have seen in the new GeneXus version, you have a new object, which is the design system object, the DSO. And what we intend this object to do is to introduce ourselves to the concept of design systems. To do so, we don't only have this new design system object, but also a set of resources that will allow us to have a DSO that is full within GeneXus. If the GeneXus developer is working with a sim object, you can transform that into a DSO, which is a mechanism that GeneXus will solve for you automatically And the result of that process is the creation of a design system object that will have all the definitions made in that object theme, and that will allow us to have the initial base so that we can keep on applying our designs to this new design system object. So there is a conversion process from a theme object to design system, or of course, logically, you can create a new DSO and you can start from scratch. Great. I have a question by Lucia. If I use other tools to design, for example, Figma, and then I transform it to Sketch, do I have to take anything into consideration? Okay, I think that's a question addressed to me. Okay, it's a bit of a captious question because you may do so, but the thing is that you need to be really careful when doing that because you need to take a lot of things into account because those translation processes between formats may introduce errors that you don't want to have. And secondly, because we always recommend to open that sketch file in the very sketch file and see that everything that is predefined appears as waitlisted. And we also recommend using the plugin that we have for Sketch so that you're not just importing the design, but every necessary asset as well, whether it's images or fonts or whatever, so that you don't have any kind of complication when it comes to importing it into GeneXus. Okay, I have a question by Daniel. If I want to include a CSS that is external to the object, what would be the best way to proceed? Okay, I'll answer that then. In that case, the DSO has two main sections that are tokens that will allow you to specify tokens that will be applied in several classes or a variety of classes of your design system. And then the style section that will allow you to define the different styles. If you want to use a certain CSS that you find on the web or any particular website, it would be just enough to copy and paste in the style section to adjust the class names as necessary depending on your naming criteria. And with that, it should be enough for you to start working with these styles in GeneXus. Then that class will be applied to different controls where you may want to use it. And that's basically it. You may run into or come across some syntax issues with some CSS features that will, you know that CSS is a very broad thing. I can tell you a bit about something that happened to us not long ago with animations. When you're defining keyframes within animations, we realized that the parcel was not identifying that syntax, and that's been already solved. So basically, it would be copy paste. It would be a matter of copy pasting within the design systems. Any questions from the audience? Let me just while you get some of the questions, allow me to add something to what Federico was saying. If as a designer you have any doubts about what a token is, in the design system modeling with low code, we explained a bit about that new concept that it's good for you to be familiar with because it's at the heart of our DSO in GeneXus. So if you don't know what that is or you have any questions, that would be a great talk to take a look at to get some better insights. Yeah, and that talk, it's actually the third link on the chat. You will find it there. Okay, I have a question by Lucia. When you import a design on Sketch, GeneXus doesn't recognize any test log. Okay, I'll answer that too. So when you're working with a GeneXus design, you need to think about conventions. In this case, all the text layers by default will be declared as variables. If Lucia, maybe what you want to do is define a test log, you will need to use a convention, which is already predefined in our wiki. And we also, you will find it very simplified there. And you need to add a prefix, which is static. And there is another convention also worth mentioning on text layers. Mauro has just shared the link to the Miro that I was telling you about. So you have the convention. If you want the variable to be read write instead of read only, you have another convention, which is to preset the name of the layer with input. I don't know if that answers your question, but well, just feel free to re-ask. Rodrigo Alvarez is his hand raised. Go ahead, Rodrigo. Hello, good afternoon. Yeah, okay, so I have a question. I think the relevance of design nowadays when you're building a system is clear. But a lot of GeneXus programmers that have been working with the tool for a couple of years, we didn't have this stage, or we didn't think that this stage was so important, and now we are coming across all of this. How do you recognize this cycle development to be like for a GeneXus programmer or a GeneXus project from the point of view of how to incorporate design? I don't know if the question is clear. Yeah, I think it is. But yeah, what we recommend is always, well, the designer should start doing all the creative work of designing the application, starting with small modules. We don't really recommend building the entire design, the entire megalithic design of an application, then try to import it, but rather you build small modules, you discuss some criteria, naming criteria, conventions, whatever, with the programmer, with the developer, and then you do that before the import, and then you try to import that into GeneXus, and the developer will try to detect any mistakes or errors or convention issues that could come from the design aspects, and then have a conversation again with the designer to try to, run that cycle time and again, so until the module is complete. And then it's, the developer's task to get all the logics around it, and the designer can move forward to a new module, and that's how you make progress in the project. I don't know, Rodrigo, if you feel like I've answered your question. Yeah. So basically, it's about starting with the design, right? Yes, designers are the ones that know best about how to, convey ideas through an application. So they should be the ones in charge of that. And maybe us as developers, that we tend to see things a bit more structured. We try to focus on providing structure to that design, because that's really important when it comes to importing. Everything that is designed will have a direct impact on the development itself, right? So the developer's view is paramount when it comes to, importing, before importing. And I would like to add something. There is an advantage that is exclusive to GeneXus that allows you to, in a standard developer's cycle, because we have prototyped, when you're doing the prototyping, when you do the sketch import, you do that directly on the funnel platform. So if the designer is designing, I don't know, on Sketch, on a mobile application, you import that on GeneXus, even that is still in a discovery phase of the product, you can still quickly get to having a functional prototype on iPhone, for instance, to try it out with real users. And that is an advantage, because oftentimes what happens is that you do this on paper, or you do it on clickable prototypes that are in a way reliable, but they are really distracting from the prototyping tool itself. So maybe the user wants to click in some places where they can't, so this is a good way of trying the concept as if it were a real case scenario, and GeneXus makes that faster. It allows you to use the final product with real code and with fast prototypes. On top of the fact that once that is validated by the user, you have, gone a long way in terms of the code, and then starting, picking up there is easier, because in more traditional phases, that would be the first place you would do any coding or programming, and this makes you, be weeks ahead of a traditional development cycle. I mean, development and design cycle. Was that your question, Rodrigo? Okay. Yeah. Yes. May I add something else? I think that the key issue here is, as Damián said, the integration of designers as part of that iterative development and validation process together with developers, in whatever way that you're trying to integrate that design, or you're trying to, take it forward. What I think is key here is that designers become involved in the process. it's a very active kind of involvement. And then you can have different alternatives, such as, for example, you will get some solutions on Sketch that will give you a final solution because they will create structures and everything. Or maybe you can go down another road, which is, for example, I want to create a design system from scratch, based on the design team's specs. Whatever you choose to do, I think that the bottom line is that you will always be working hand in hand with designers. You will have a number of processes, a lot of iterations that will allow you to work together so that you can reach a solution in the best possible way. Absolutely agree, Fede. Okay, I have a question by Xiomara. Actually, it's two, so I'm going to go with the first one. Is it possible to use Figma, Adobe, or any other tool that exports in Sketch? Okay, so as we said earlier, what you can do, you can import, yeah, but we only support Sketch for now. We will be working with Figma, which has become much more important over the last year and a half, and we are intending to have a very similar import process as we do with Sketch, but using Figma directly. So you can just use, for example, the URL for a design, and that could be also imported in GeneXus, and we're planning to include that for the first quarter of 2022. So sorry for the spoiler, but yeah, that's what we're planning to do. Okay, another question by Xiomara. Is it possible to use this to build web apps, or is it just how does it work? You can do it for both. You can do it for web or for SD panels, but the importance is that you will have the import dialog that will have a check that is asking you if you want to import as web panels or not. When you're importing as web panels, you're going to get the traditional GeneXus web panels, good old traditional panels, or it's going to give you a panel SD that also works with the Angular generator. And regarding the first question, if you are designing on Figma, for example, and you're exporting to .sketch, and you import that in GeneXus, it's very likely that it won't work. It's not going to work because it will not have defined conventions, but oftentimes the export is not linear, and that generates a weird structure on Sketch, which is not native, and that results in some import issues. So our recommendation is always to export, open on Sketch, and save again, adding in that case all the conventions and the syntax that you need from the Sketch side, let's say. But when you're importing directly what you converted directly on Figma or Adobe XD or Lunacy, you'll have some issues. Yeah, and don't forget to use the plugin, right? You need to try to use that plugin to export design from Scratch to the GX Sketch format, which will include everything, fonts and everything. Okay, I have a number of questions in one. It says, if I hire an external designer, then I'm not going to be able to integrate to the development team, and to whom I'm intending to send some predefined mockups. What would be the best way to have a design and for me to be able to integrate that in GeneXus in a web project and an SD project? Should I ask the Sketch deliverable, Photoshop deliverable? Am I going to have to iterate a number of times with the designer, or is it a straightforward process? Okay, so that's a lot of questions and a lot of answers. My piece of advice here would be that if you have an external designer and you want them to give you an initial mock-up, Sketch is not hard to use. So if you're a developer and you have access to Sketch, you can do all the necessary touches to have a correct import that will work in GeneXus. So you're playing both roles, designer and developer, which is not exactly what we recommend, but it's something that can be done. It would be ideal for you as a developer to be able to, make some small tweaks and adjustments. Maybe the designer gives you something that looks beautiful, but when it comes to importing, well, they forgot something, some details, that will be important when it comes to the GeneXus import. And that is the kind of thing that you should be able to, touch when working on Sketch. and we don't really recommend you to get any Photoshop deliverable, because that's not going to be really useful. So it's better if you get the mockup directly on Sketch and you can keep on making progress after that. I don't know if you'd like to say anything else, Mauro. Yeah, a couple of things. Regarding what Damián was saying, we have the link to Miro that was posted above on the chat. And we have a methodological proposal of how to make developers and designers work together for the Sketch import. It's a number of stages that Damián described a couple of minutes ago. That is on Miro, and we got to that modeled by interviewing a number of clients that were using it and learning about the rights and wrongs that they were coming across. And we got to this methodological guidelines, which is what we do internally whenever we develop something on Sketch for it to be imported in GeneXus. That really works out for us, and I think it's a good initial guideline, especially if you're a new designer, because it will tell you a bit about the first test, how to work with some conventions together with the developer. And that very same methodological guide has a sort of checklist for the developer and for the designer as well, throughout the different stages of that work. And I think that's a great starting point. Secondly, when you're hiring an external designer, it's not the same to design on Sketch or Photoshop without thinking that that is going to be imported in GeneXus, from believing or knowing beforehand that that is going to be imported in GeneXus, because the former is a drawing which has no underlying structure, but the latter needs to be a structured design or drawing to be imported in GeneXus. So for example, if you don't care about the layers, names, and because ultimately what you're going to get is just an image which has no, in which layers have no relevance. That's one thing. But when you're importing it in Sketch, that is relevant. You need to prevent things from overlapping, which is maybe not important when designing, but when it comes to importing in GeneXus, that is critical. So whenever you get a designer, it's key that you find a designer that has that ability to think a bit beyond the plain image or drawing itself. On Miro, you'll find a list of skills that designers should have in terms of how to use Sketch, because, for example, Sketch allows you to use symbols, and that element, if you're reusing it on the interface, you're just going to be using one instance of that button. And the same thing for styles. For instance, you can define the style of a text or a color that has color variables that will allow you to map it one-to-one with the tokens that Federico was telling you about earlier today. And if the designer doesn't know how to use those Sketch features, then when you import it in GeneXus, it's not going to be, well, performance is not going to be so good. It's going to be a bit wonky, because imagine that every color that you're using is predefined as one color in one place, and you have instances for everything. Then GeneXus is going to take that as a token that will be defined in a single place and with a lot of instances in other parts, and then design will look much better if that color is hard-coded in each component. The same thing for textile, for example, textile. On Sketch, that is directly mapped with the DSO of GeneXus, with the classes of this DSO of GeneXus. And if that is not structured, then you will have really hard, really complex files because there is no structure. Each instance of a text that is the same as 100 plus I, then that's a huge number of classes. So it's critical at this stage to have a developer that, at the very least, whenever you talk a bit about the list of Sketch features, they know about that, because that will help you have a much better structured design on Sketch, which is definitely going to result in things being easier later on. I'm sorry, I think that was a very, very long answer. Absolutely. Everything that is related to the structure is going to have a direct impact on GeneXus. So if the design is not properly structured, then you're already facing some difficulties. So what Mauro was saying about styles and grouping elements in a consistent way, in a coherent way, semantically together, all these teeny tiny things always make a difference. And this is something that really shows in the real app. Okay, I have a comment and a question by Xiomara. Xiomara is saying that she tried Lunacy, which is a Windows sketch version, and the import was okay. But the question is, if I've already imported the design and I've made some arrangements to obtain the pixel perfect in GeneXus, and then I want to re-import again the design because there is a new version with new screens. The styles that I changed, are they overwritten or does it create new ones? How do you suggest that? Okay, that really depends a lot on how you do things, because as we said earlier today, we recommend working with small modules and just a few screens to get to that pixel perfect status in GeneXus, and then you move on with the development. But maybe you don't want to do that until the full design is complete and you keep on working on other modules. In that case, the re-import is going to override the objects in GeneXus. So if you hadn't touched the objects by yourself, or you didn't write anything to the events or whatever, then you shouldn't have any problems with the re-importing process, because that is going to create everything from scratch, which includes, for example, the new screens in each iteration. But if you had already touched those objects, then what we recommend is before you do any import, you need to package all the objects of the previous stage, of that first import stage, and only then you can import again, because that will leave the objects instead of in the place of the new module, and it's not going to be overwritten. And this is a manual step where you have to bring in the new screens, for example, or copy all the classes to the design system. That is a manual process, but if you're working with just a handful of screens, it shouldn't be too complex. I don't know if that is clear enough, but if you have any questions or doubts.
Porque Xiomara dice que ella cambia los estilos.
Yeah, okay, so she's changing styles and she wants to know if the style that she changed in the design is going to override the style that she had previously imported. And the answer is yes. By default, everything will be overwritten. So if you're changing something from GeneXus after importing, you should package all the objects so that that is not overwritten. But you will always have the history, the object's history, right? So if you want to go back to what you had before, you can always do that. Okay, I have a question by Jose Francisco. He says, what options do I have to create a menu for front end? He says, I've worked with Action Group, but I see that it's a very limited object to create a web page menu. Yeah, maybe I can answer that. That is true. Initially, when we started working with responsive, we included this menu. And this is something that has been the case for already a couple of versions. So what we're doing now is we're working with Unanimo, which is the GeneXus DSO that contains a set of commands that are specifically built for Unanimo that allow you to resolve this kind of common needs for web apps. Right now, we don't have an analogous thing for Action Group, but you have similar controls or commands. For example, a sidebar that allows you to serve through the different screens of your application, but it's stylistically different. It's a sidebar, as the name says, of course. But let me tell you that we're working on some specs to give this command, this control, more potential and more power. So maybe the following upgrades will be a bit more flexible in terms of the action group. We will add some new events. We will handle events in a better way, actually, and we will give it a bit more of performance so that we can do some more complex development. But always bear in mind that you can use your user controls that will allow you to import markups or HTML markups or templates. And this enables to create personalized controls. So even though we are working to, take this native GeneXus control to the next level, you could be working with, with another control for the needs that you have for that specific case. Okay, great. I've got a question by Jaime. What mechanisms are there to use external markups and templates? Okay, yeah, I'm gonna answer that too, because I think that it's a bit what I just said, right? It's since a couple of versions ago, we've had this user control that allows you to, well, just to give you some historical background, it was a resource that in the first versions of GeneXus Evolution was developed and packaged in GeneXus, and it was installed as an external resource. And then we improved the update, and there was a new user control implementation that allows you to work within the GeneXus KB, which is what allows you basically to import those markups and get controls based on HTML specs of other controls, or maybe you're using a library or a framework that you have available. There are plenty of documents and examples on Wiki that will help you when it comes to implementing these user controls, but it's a very interesting resource. It's very powerful, and it allows you to model external controls in a very seamless way in GeneXus. Okay, we have a question by Rodrigo. How do you define a gib on the design? Yeah, maybe that's about Sketch, so I'll answer that. When you're talking about Sketch, what you need to do is the elements that make up your grid, you should group them, and that group should have a convention that we have, which is basically prefixing the name of the layer with the grid token, and that would create a GeneXus grid. What we always recommend is to use symbols as grid elements, and also to override whatever you have to override. So for example, if you want to override text or image or whatever, you override in the symbol, and then GeneXus creates an SDT and a data provider with the data that you fed it. And it will, of course, generate the panel grid, and it will load those data as examples. What else could I tell you about that? Well, you can use different symbols as part of your grid with different styles or different locations of elements. All of this, of course, in a mobile context, because you can change layouts and you can use multiple layouts. And in web, the only limitation is because you don't have multiple layouts, all the elements need to correspond to one single symbol. But apart from that, all the rest should be supported if you stick to the conventions. Yes, in the import and the Sketch import documentation, you have a number of examples that include grids, both web and mobiles, and horizontal and vertical. Yes, I have another question that I think was kind of mentioned, but it says, are you thinking about incorporating other tools to the design or Sketch, for example, Figma, or the case of Adobe? Yeah, we said that at the beginning of the talk. Our main goal for the first quarter of next year is to incorporate Figma. We will begin probably calling it import design instead of import sketch. So you can select whatever provider you want for the imports, and you just import the design, and the process will be exactly the same as the rest. It will generate everything that is necessary, no panels, styles, and so on. Great. Okay, this is for you. Jose Francisco is asking, I would like to add some icons and images to a menu, and also to work with subgroups from the code. Is there any user control that you recommend to create the menu? Well, yeah, we have several, and I think that the decision should be about whether or not you're thinking about using other resources or other controls from a specific framework. For example, I could just give an example of a case that has been around for quite a long time in the market, which is a Bootstrap Controls. You have a navbar, which basically what it does is it creates a menu that has well, it's a drop-down menu for different options, and when you put that in a mobile view, that is automatically adjusted so that you can see the application from a mobile browser. So that could be a good reference. In terms of the implementation, you could use images or icons or whatever you want, and you can do the loading through a GeneXus structure. You can have an SDT with the levels that you want in your structure, and that SDT can be loaded through a data provider from your own database for the transactional, the data origin that you want to work with. But yeah, definitely navbar by Bootstrap is a good example. And in terms of the implementation, you have no problems whatsoever with the levels nesting. Okay, and when is Unanimo being released? Okay, we have already got to a very advanced stage of the development. As a matter of fact, we have in-company projects that use it. I don't know exactly when. I can't tell you a date, but I want to say, early 2022. You know, okay, for those specific questions where you don't have a date, we have an AMA on the 16th of December that will tell us a lot about GeneXus roadmap for next year. So you can ask these questions there if you want. I have a question by Andres. If I have a KB that is developed, sorry, can I import a design if that is developed? Yes, you may do so, but the difference is that we will not generate anything for those patterns. What we do when you import from Sketch is basically we generate all the web panels that are native to GeneXus. And if you want to, use both worlds and you want to have GeneXus native panels, and then you want to have patterns in other panels, then you might as well do it. Okay, Gustavo says, how should the designer organize the layers to make it easier for the developer? Mauro, I don't know if you want to talk about that. Yeah, I keep on sending you to take a look at that Miro that we shared at the beginning of the talk. I'm gonna, just in case, copy paste that again on the chat. There, you have a lot of documentation that is useful. The idea is to structure the layers by grouping all the elements that are part of one same element, but try to imagine that the content is part of a grid. So you can't group elements that are different cells that are not in the same row or the same column. So if you have, for example, two elements and then you have a third element beneath, then you group two elements on the one hand and another element on the other so that you get this grid-like structure. On Miro, you will find examples of how to group elements, and there is a description at the bottom of that link so that you're sticking to this grid design and grid structure. Okay, and just to comment on that, this is when it's really important to have the developer's view, because they know, they take a look at the design, they see the structure, and they kind of tell you already how to group those elements because they're used to working with the GeneXus layout. So all of that is going to be directly mapped on the GeneXus generated panels. So for us, that's really important. Also, naming, everything that comes from the design part will have a direct impact on the development aspect. And as Federico was saying, it's really important to work together, designer and developer, at that phase, because we have some instances in which developers and designers work together, they get together, they go over the sketch design. Each of them has their own view of things. Of course, the developer is closer of how to set up the panels and structures and naming and stuff. So that phase working together is really important because you can fine-tune a number of details that will make the import much more seamless. Jose Francisco is sharing some code on the chat, and he's asking us, what is the purpose of this, of these elements, considering that the IDE of GeneXus can be handled with the responsive design? Okay, the thing is that what applies the responsive rules is basically that media query in a CSS. And that is defined in this way, precisely so that when you use your responsive sizes, then at CSS level, you will have something that can be applied. That is why it's specified for each of the sizes. That's why you have for each size your respective media queries. This is the same for the sim object and different frameworks. For example, in Bootstrap, which is the one that is using this concept of 12 columns on the screen, it's exactly like this. It ends up implementing CSS rules that are the rules that allow you to maybe move some elements around or hide or show depending on the size of the screen. Okay, I have a question by Carolina. Does the import support the navigation flow of the panels, or is it better to do it once imported? Okay, if by navigation flow you mean links in the design, yes, that is supported. It's 100% supported. Once you import that, you will have all your GeneXus calls between panels. And then if you define some transition animations, that will be defined in terms of class of fonts, for example. So for example, if you want to have a push-up animation that is defined at class level, and then when you see that in the front end, you will see it just in the same way that you would see it in the design. Okay, I have a question by Sandra. The order of the layers that are defined in the design, should it be bottom up? Well, strictly, that is not entirely necessary. But what you do need to take into account is that Sketch, Mauro, let me know if I'm wrong here, but they work with the layer elevation concept, which is when they are overlapped, depending on the order. So that would be the only case in which it would be important to take into account how you're distributing your elements. But I think otherwise you wouldn't have any sort of inconvenience. Okay, another one. Do we have any limitation or recommendation? Sorry, come again, Aníbal? Are there any limitations or recommendations in the sketch size, regarding the sketch size? Okay, I don't really know whether they're talking about the size of the sketch itself, the file itself, or the number of screens. A priori, I would say no limitations. But if the size of the file is too large or it's got too many screens, then the generation of the objects associated to it will be a bit slower. That's why we recommend working in small modules. But apart from that, you wouldn't have any sort of limitation. Okay, another one. Do you recommend using external libraries with the predefined symbols? I can answer that, Damián, if you want. Yeah, right now we don't support internal symbol libraries. If you wanted to use external libraries, what we would recommend you to do is to incorporate those symbols in your design and then de-link it from the library. You need to be really careful sometimes because especially material design libraries or iOS libraries have a lot of symbols that are nested, and so it's not as easy as just putting the symbol in, but you need to do it from within. You need to de-link all the symbols. Looking into the future, we are thinking about support to get external symbols, but that's not the case at the moment. Sebastián asked us, when I input a design, I have black images that look good in the design. What's happening? Well, that is exactly what we discussed today. We recommend you to use your plugin to import your designs, because this is happening due to the fact that you're not finding images that were marked as exportable from Sketch. Sketch will define the drawing or the image, but the images are not part of the package. So that is why the plugin will generate those images, and when you import that into GeneXus, you should be able to see the images correctly. Yeah, another reason why that may be happening is that you have exported on Sketch the images with a certain resolution, but not in the base resolution. And that is the one that you need to work with, because the initial representation is done with the first resolution. So you need the ×1 resolution. If you want to do it ×2, ×3, you may, but nevertheless, you still need to export it in the ×1 resolution so that you can see it properly on GeneXus. Okay, another one. What do you recommend when it comes to aligning the elements? Okay, we strongly recommend you to, I'm going to point you again in the direction of Miro. As part of our design guidelines, we have all the ways in which the elements are anchored. And something that Sketch gives you as well, that maybe you don't know that, is that if you're choosing at an arbor level, if you're selecting at an arbor level, you have a check. I can't remember that. But basically, there's a check that if you select that, you can start playing with the screen, changing the size, and see how that behaves, how those elements behave with different screen sizes. And that allows you to, debug or test what things need to be done for them to be taken into GeneXus when it comes to the import stage. And that should be well aligned if you have designed it in a way that the anchorage on Sketch is good. Santiago is asking us, can I import a frame object instead of a design system object? Yes, you will be able to do that, but it's not something that we recommend, because this design system will be a replacement for the Sims objects, and so that's going to be absolutely dated. So the idea is that when you import a design from Sketch, you are working with the latest version, which is the design system. If you just, should it happen that you want to keep on working with a sim theme, then you can do that. That is described in the frequently asked questions section of our wiki, but it's not something that we would entirely recommend. You should just, start working with design system. Okay, we have another one from Bruno. Is there any website that we could access or app that we could download to see and try, that it has a good design system object use? Anything that you could recommend? Yeah, we do. I think that probably Unanimo is the best example. I don't know what you guys think about that. Yeah, definitely. Unanimo is the best example of that. Yeah, even though it's in its early, in design phases, there is a KB that you can download and you can see how it's implemented. And you can see how the development or the implementation of the design system was with the use of, tokens and different styles. And it's also worth mentioning that Unanimo, on top of adding styles that were specified by the design team for all the controls in general, it also has a number of definitions that constitute the basis so that you can start working with other design systems. And by this, I mean classes, CSS classes that we use to try to access the styles of certain elements, because let's remember that this is a generator. And so the HTML structure and other things are already solved by GeneXus. They come by default solved by GeneXus. So there is a set of things that, solve some common issues. So spacing issues, margins, alignments, stuff like that. That is all part of Unanimo. So yeah, I would say that that is a good practical example to take a look at. As a matter of fact, there is information about this on our wiki of where you have the KB And yeah, you can take a look at that there. Okay, Ursula has raised her hand. Can you hear me? Yes, loud and clear. Okay, yeah, Damián has some GX sketch samples that are published on the wiki, and you can download that GX sketch file and you can try the import directly. That imports a design system that has the object already, set and ready. So you can take a look at examples with that, and that works with a free GeneXus version with, I think it's upgrade 6. Yeah, correct. Yeah, thanks, Ursula. That's great. Thanks for the reminder. Okay, I have a question by Federico. Okay, I'm gonna read it the way it's written. Okay, we have a lot of images that we import from Sketch that are defined as GUID as a name. Is that avoidable? Okay, that's a Sketch issue, and no, you can't avoid that. That's the short answer. What's happening here is that on Sketch, when you select a software system image to associate it to a J, for example, then that is the name that you get from Sketch, and there is nothing, no information that we have to rename it. So we didn't just want to come up with names that don't match. So those images, what will happen is that they will be changed by the developer with something that comes from the database. That is what usually happens. So for functional prototypes, that shouldn't really matter. And for real applications, well, the font or the source of that image will be different. But as a workaround, what you can do is you can group that J. You can name it in whatever way you want, and you can mark it as an exportable element of the group, and that image will be created with the name of the group itself, and the GUID wouldn't be really necessary if you do that. So you could just erase it. Okay, Agustin is asking us, the Sketch import process, does it support SCMG images? Yeah, that's a tough question. I feel that maybe you can tell me a bit more about that, but I think that on the web, SVG, that was SVG, sorry, is not supported, but it is supported for mobile. Yeah, the ID interprets the SVGs. As a matter of fact, Unimo has all vectorial resources. So yeah, well, so the answer is yes, as long as you're importing for web. I'll know if you're importing for mobile. And in that case, yeah, you would have to mark that stage as an image exportable.
Las soluciones necesarias para mobile, que con SVG no sería necesario, pero todavía no se soporta para mobile.
Yeah, so that is going to happen for mobile, but not for now. Okay, we have our last 5 minutes. Any comments that you would like to make to give the session a wrap up? Any final question by the audience that we may have? Okay, so if we have no further comments, no further questions, before we close this session, is that a lot of these questions that you may have can be asked on Stack Overflow. We have migrated all of our forums to that platform. We're strongly using it and recommending it. Okay, so just as a final remark, thanks to all the members of the team and all the attendees for coming to this session. Remember that you can find this AMA talk recorded on our website, so you can see it again. You can watch it again anytime you want. And please don't forget to check out our GeneXus.live. You will find all the deep dives on our GeneXus event and all the webinars that are coming up. So see you soon. Thanks a lot, and see you soon. Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you.